Hazbin Hotel fandom is a complete mess, and the sooner that we all acknowledge that, the faster we can move on to the actually important questions, such as why and how. Join me today to investigate this tangled mess of a fandom together. So what in the rather inappropriate heavens is the Hazbin Hotel? Well, okay, it's a TV show. You probably knew that already. It's a show that's currently on Amazon Prime, but it has its starts as indie animation on YouTube. The pilot was released in 2019, but the show wasn't actually made and distributed until 2024. In a lot of ways, it is sort of I would say the biggest indie animation success, at least in the past so many years. The fact that it started as a pilot on YouTube that was funded almost entirely via Patreon, that then turned into being produced and distributed through one of the major streaming networks, which is Amazon Prime, is a huge deal, and very much kudos to the creator and to everyone involved in that. The way it turned into a fandom is actually kind of interesting because the fandom itself existed before the show came out. The fandom was created basically from the pilot, and then it was sustained by the pilot that eventually turned into an actual indie series on the creator's YouTube channel, which is a spin-off show called Hell of a Boss. Both of these shows take place in Hell. They just sort of focus on different aspects, and as far as I can tell, Hazbin Hotel is sort of more of the creator's magnum opus. That's the show that she really wanted to make, but Hell of a Boss kind of came through to tide people over in the meantime. In fact, the Hazbin Hotel itself actually had thousands and thousands of works on AO3 before the show actually came out. And because of this interesting fandom history, I actually did a fandom review / reaction of this several years ago on TikTok, and now that the show has officially come out, I kind of wanted to revisit the fandom and talk a little bit more about it, especially because, quite frankly, something that we're going to talk about a lot later is there is a substantial amount of drama surrounding both the show and its creator, vivziepop. So the show itself, we'll just do a little bit of a brief overview before we really get into the weeds here. The show is a dark animated comedy. So we're already going to have a couple of little buzzers come off in terms of internet drama, which is that the internet cannot handle dark comedy, but also no one knows how to make it, which is why we get these sort of never-ending discussions about whether or not Blazing Saddles could be made today. So, Hazbin Hotel is a dark comedy, and it is about a girl who is the princess of hell. Her name is Charlie Morningstar, so she's the daughter of Lucifer, the devil. And in the world of the Hazbin Hotel, hell is very overpopulated, so once a year, all of the angels come down from heaven and try to, kill off a bunch of the people that are in hell. What Charlie wants to do is kind of come up with an alternative to that, which is create a hotel called the Hazbin Hotel, Hazbin as in has been. The people in that hotel can kind of be rehabilitated and eventually kind of earn their way to heaven rather than being slaughtered in the streets, which is a noble goal. I will say that from the summary, I can't really tell if this show is meant to have some sort of political symbolism or it's actually just a really elaborate allegory for a no-kill animal shelter. A lot of things jump out at me from this as very, very fandom-y without even getting into the characters' designs and stuff like that. Stuff set in hell, stuff kind of grappling with a lot of Christian imagery, in particular imagery surrounding angels and demons is kind of fandom bait, not intentionally, it just is. People love to at least pretend that they can have sort of nuanced conversations about morals and Christianity. There's also, I know, a lot of LGBT representation in the show, which is also a really big deal for people. Unfortunately, that will probably come up again in the drama section later, but the main character, Charlie, is bisexual. She is dating a woman who's a lesbian. I think the kind of boss, kind of father figure is asexual. There are several other queer characters that feature very prominently within the storyline. So a lot of these things make the show very attractive to fandom.
Before we kind of get into the main meat of this fandom reaction, I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer about these videos. I do not do large amounts of pre-research. I did a little bit this time just because when I'm dealing with pretty extreme controversy, accuracy. I like to be a little prepared, but I don't go really into depth. And also, I don't watch the source media basically ever because I am focusing on the fandom itself. So in general, take the things I discover as I go along the way with a grain of salt, but I am going to give you a lot of my personal insights as someone who's been in fandom for a very long time.
If you do want more scripted content, I also do that as well on my channel. And if you like this video, I would encourage you to like and subscribe because I do put a lot of work into these and I really appreciate it. With all that being said, I would like to kind of go and get a really big overview of the fandom itself. And to do that, I am probably going to go look at Twitter, I'm gonna look at Tumblr, I'm gonna look at Reddit, and I'm gonna look at AO3, and I'm kind of gonna give you just a bird's eye view of general trends that I see in the fandom.
1 hour later.
So I'm getting the feeling that you guys might like Alastor. Alastor? I wonder why. You know, I've seen people say before that he gives off Tumblr sexy man vibes, and after performing a thorough review myself, they're completely right. That 100%. Of course you guys like him. Oh, you guys like the radio? The guy on the radio? The sexy guy on the radio? That's crazy. Sorry, that's really mean. There's nothing wrong with that. No, that did jump out at me though, especially if you go on AO3, which has a very respectable amount of fanfiction on it, by the way. I think it's pushing 20k, which is a lot. All of the like top kudos fics, he's very prominent. It's either him / Reader, it's him / Lucifer. I read somewhere they have a daddy off at some point. That, I feel like that's not the way to describe that, but. And those fics span time. Like the first one, okay, I saw one that's like 2021, sure, before the actual show. One that's 2022, sure, before the actual show. One that's 2024, after the show, people still like him. Clearly, he's a big deal. So that jumped out at me first. Second thing that jumped out at me was immediately seeing ship discourse, which like, I'm not surprised to see discourse immediately in this fandom. I knew that was gonna happen. That's part of the whole thing, but I don't like to see it immediately upon trawling the main tags. But everything I've heard about the Hazbin Hotel for the past month has been discourse. So again, not surprised. Lots of fan art though. I love fan art. The one thing I will say I really appreciate about a show like this getting clout and a show like this getting big and getting picked up is I love art. I love art so much. I love people being inspired to create art. I love anything that makes people want to create art, and I love artists. If people are inspired to create because of this, I think that's amazing. If young animators are inspired by the success of this show, that is fantastic. Even if there are issues with the idea of the model being, if you're an indie animator, the only way that you can be successful is if you basically create fandom bait. You have to get so much buzz around your show, and then maybe someone will deign to give you the time of day. There are problems with that model, absolutely, and there are problems with the fact that this is happening the way it is. It's like in like indie writing, where like if you are an author, you kind of have to be a social media star as well, and the same in music. It's a problem in all of the arts fields right now. It is a problem, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing when people get successful that way. So seeing people kind of create fan art is really wonderful to me, because I hope that it's inspirational for people. Less cool is the immediate like toxic ship discourse though. I hate ship discourse. It is my least favorite thing of like all time. I do also kind of hate, like, the more I get into fandom, the more I hate the like sexy manification syndrome, where like there is always one dude character that everyone gets obsessed with, and then kind of a lot of people I think tend to ignore any thematic analysis, any sort of symbolism in the show, and also obviously ignore the female characters. That's always a problem. People always ignore the female characters to focus on that one sexy man character. But that is so far from being a unique Hazbin Hotel issue that it almost doesn't even feel worth mentioning. But there is love for other characters as well, so, you know, that's great. I think what we'll probably move on to now is talking a little bit about shipping before we'll get to the drama later. I have a list. I have a running list in my head, and I have a list written down, and we will talk about it. So that means oh, you can't see. That means it's ship time. It's ship time! So we're gonna open up my favorite website on the entire internet, which is the Shipping Wiki. It's a wiki just for shipping, and there are a lot of ships for the Hazbin Hotel that are included on there because I think there are a lot of characters and people like to ship them. So we're only gonna talk about the top ones. I think I want to give a special shout out to Alastor / Reader on AO3. It's not one of the top ships, but there are like 1,000 fics for it, and considering the fact that I would say AO3 is not generally a platform on which X-readers are super popular or even super well loved in the community on there, that's a lot. Like, that's like K-pop fandom levels of X-reader happening there. You know, special honorable mention to that. And then let's talk about the biggest ship in the fandom. Actually, like legit, the biggest ship in the fandom is a femme/ship because they are canon. They are an established relationship. And so that's Charlie Morningstar and then her girlfriend, Vaggie. I think that's how you say that name. We'll get there. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll talk about it later. Put a pin in it. This is the biggest ship in the fandom. It is between a bisexual woman and a lesbian, and they are an established ship. And it does have the most tagged works on AO3 for this fandom, and I think that's great. There's not really much else to say about it. I know some people have issues with the way their relationship was portrayed in the show, but you cannot deny the fact that they are a canon relationship, and that's pretty cool. The next two ships are both kind of like options for a very popular character called Angel Dust, and so those two ships are Husker Dust and Radio Dust. Radio Dust is Alastor and Angel Dust, and then Husker Dust is Angel Dust and Husk, who is another side character in the show. Not tons to say about either of these, at least from me. I don't know, good for both of them. Good for all of them. Femme/. Okay, and now, the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time for This Is Not a Drama Show. It's where we talk about drama. I generally really hate to talk about specific people on my channel because I make jokes about it, but I genuinely am not a drama YouTuber, and I genuinely don't want to be. And I don't really ever want to be one of those YouTubers that makes a video that's like all about X person and why they suck. Even if they've done something wrong, it just doesn't feel right to me. That being said, it is actually impossible to talk about drama surrounding the Hazbin Hotel and the Hazbin Hotel fandom without talking about the many allegations and many controversies surrounding the creator vivziepop. I will not be going into great detail over these allegations. What I do know is that a lot of them are relatively controversial, especially the harsher ones are not really proven. I would suggest that you look into those major allegations yourself, and also know that many of them are from years and years ago, and she herself has said that she has changed and grown, and she's definitely not the same person that she was 8 to 10 or more years ago. So I feel pretty comfortable not going over those in great detail. The one kind of allegation I would say about her that I think is pretty apparent is just that she really probably needs to log off of Twitter. Twitter is an evil platform, and we should all pretend like it doesn't exist if we possibly can. Something I'm a little more comfortable talking about are the criticisms of the show. Even though they aren't necessarily fandom specific, like these are things that are being discussed within the fandom itself. You have to deal with the fact that these criticisms are being made if you are a fan of the show, and you have to kind of figure out what you think about that. And so I think that those things are, you know, pretty important to bring up. The show itself has received a lot of criticism being that the plot isn't particularly coherent, that the characters aren't compelling, that the pacing is weird, and that the dialogue is stilted. The big one I have seen a lot is a critique that it is not necessarily overly raunchy, but raunchy without reason, in that a lot of the jokes are unnecessary, and also that the characters swear so much that it seems unnatural. I think it really would probably be appropriate for me to actually be swearing throughout this video the way that I do in real life, but I do worry about demonetization and things like that, so I will allow myself just one well, I've been saying hell, but that is just, you have to say that. I don't know, like, I'm not gonna say HE double hockey sticks the entire time. Like, there was a big edit that went that got really popular on Twitter. That was an edit of The Amazing Digital Circus, which is another indie animation project that blew up recently and has a huge amount of attention. And it was edited, so there were a bunch more like swear words in and stuff. And it was like, if The Amazing Digital Circus was written by vivziepop, that blowing up, I think, led to a really negative opinion of the show and of her. These criticisms are like valid criticisms. I haven't watched the show, so I can't say like how accurate they are, but these are some major like quality issues that people have with the show. There are also some sort of moral and ethical qualms that people have with the show. I kind of had to discount a lot of critique just in terms of the fact that like the show is a dark comedy. So like any critique that is like, you shouldn't have something dark in your show is just not going to be particularly relevant here, because you kind of have to come at the show with that in mind. That being said, there are still ways that I think that are appropriate and less appropriate to deal with certain topics. There has been a lot of critique of the show in the way that it deals with topics surrounding sexual abuse and the survivors of sexual abuse. There has been a lot of criticism on the show in the treatment of women in the show, in that people think that they tend to be a little more pigeonholed than male characters are into certain stereotypes. And then there's also a lot of critique on the treatment of Latinos in the show. The girlfriend of the main character, so Vaggie, is meant to be Latina in some way, and some people would consider her to be kind of a stereotype. I think one thing to note about that critique is that vivziepop is Latina, and she has mentioned like relating to that character before. That doesn't mean that she can't write Latinos or women badly. People can reinforce stereotypes about their own identities, absolutely, but it is something to keep in mind when you're looking at that critique. There's also some major critique to be made of the show and how it deals with racial themes in general. I know the character of Alastor has some design elements that seem to be inspired by certain things about voodoo, which is a very difficult topic because there are a lot of issues with cultural appropriation surrounding the practice of voodoo. The character is meant to be half Creole. Some people think that makes it better and some people don't. There is a character that people allege at least is meant to be black coded, who is enslaved in like canon in the show. He is not like depicted as black, but that is a way that he is often interpreted. So those are a lot of major criticisms that the show has received, and all of those things I think on their own have sparked a lot of discussion, discourse, and arguments within the fandom and from people outside of the fandom, and is a lot of the reason I believe why people hate I guess the fandom. The Hazbin Hotel Fandom is definitely one of those fandoms that you see in a lot of DNIs. I hate DNIs, but I think that a lot of the criticisms of the show and the criticisms of the creator have definitely led to a very, very negative image for the show and for fans of the show in general. There are like a lot of other critiques that are made and a lot of other arguments, especially there are allegations of the environment of animators working on the show being a toxic environment. I have absolutely no idea of the credibility of these claims, and I also don't want to comment on these things too heavily for legal reasons. In conclusion, I think that this show, I can totally see why it is appealing to people. In a lot of ways, it feels like Tumblr's dream show. A lot of the characters have the vibe of Onceler fan art, and I mean that totally neutrally, but I do know that the fandom is full of controversy. To me, it does not feel like a place that I would really want to engage in discourse, and I think that the toxicity and controversy sort of surrounding the show and the fandom are all really not very good signs. The validity of critique of the show, of the fandom, of the creator is not something that I can necessarily comment on, but I do think that it gives me pause. But I do appreciate animation and I really appreciate indie creators, so I wouldn't necessarily say that I think that that controversy in and of itself is an indicator that something is, you know, ontologically evil or whatever, but I think everyone needs to kind of decide for themselves. And for me, what I would say, based on the way that I do my ratings, which I do like to do, I like to give a little rating just to kind of get a big summary of what's going on at the end. I think for me, given the extreme level of discourse and toxicity that I saw, even only looking at this stuff for roughly half an hour to 45 minutes, I think I might have to give this actually my lowest score yet and go with a 4 out of 10. Join me today